All right, welcome back. Mostly one player from every team that is likely on the block. Some teams it was tough because some teams probably aren't going to give up too much, if anything. Um, so we got the Jets with the first round, but for the most part, players that are on the block or could be on the block. Some of these are going to be obvious. Some of these are going to require a little more explanation. But let's dive into it. Ducks, I have Kevin Shattenkirk on the block. I think that's going to be the first piece to go from Anaheim. I know everyone's talking about Klingberg, but with a $7 million a year contract, in his severe underperformance this year, it's going to be a tough sell, even with salary retained. I think Shattenkirk with a 3.9 annual average value on an expiring contract, a veteran, solid defensive player, could provide some value for some team, and someone will pay for Shattenkirk. Other players I also had, I threw Klingberg up because we never know. It was a one-year prove-it deal. It hasn't worked out so well, but we don't know where that could go in the future. He's still on the block. He may get traded. Next up, I got Comtois. Hasn't really panned out. Hasn't really turned into that offensive player, top six forward that was expected of him. Maybe a change of scenery and maybe will be beneficial to him, and maybe they get something in exchange for him, assuming his value continues to decrease over time. And it might with age if he doesn't break out. I also have Henrique up there. Henrique's starting to age. He's got another year left after this year, so he's a little bit of term. Still under $6 million, still a very productive player. That's always one player I could see going. I don't know if it's going to be this year or this summer or next year, but I could totally see Henrique being traded for some pretty valuable assets. Next up, Coyotes. Obviously, it's Jason Chikrin. Gostisbehere is also on the block as well, having a great season. It wouldn't surprise me if either one or both of these guys got moved. That one's pretty straightforward. Bruins was tough. Who do you give up? It's probably going to be their first-round pick, in all honesty. Could maybe see Trent Frederick on the move as a younger player who's starting to break out and look good and maybe would flourish in a different scenario, not so much a grinder role in the bottom six. If a team is willing to give him that opportunity, so I was a little hesitant on that because how many teams are going to give him an opportunity to play in their top six? Right? Well, other guys I have going is Smith and Mike Riley, purely for cap dumps. I don't think Smith is as likely to go because they don't have a whole lot of forward depth. DeBrusk is out, and we're seeing Craig Smith play on that first line with Bergeron and Marchand. And Fabian Lysell, really the only Bruins top prospect. Come at me. They have, I think, one other first-round pick in their system, John Beecher, and he's having a brutal season down in the AHL, still young. But nonetheless, Lysell showing a lot of promise. The GM of the Bruins has a tendency to trade the first-round pick and or a first-round pick, former first-round pick, one of the higher touted prospects of the organization. So there's that. I hope they don't trade Lysell. I mean, the pick, I wouldn't be too upset if they traded, but next year they may not be a playoff team. Depends what they do this offseason. They got some concerns that need to be addressed. Sabres, I didn't have a whole lot. Gergensons, I think, is the most obvious to go on a relatively decent contract. A little expensive for the production he provides, but definitely provides some leadership on the ice. Definitely a veteran guy that can provide some depth scoring for some teams. I don't think the Sabres need to do a whole lot. It wouldn't surprise me if they'd go all in on someone like Chikrin to shore up their defense a little bit. I think they address their goaltending situation in this offseason and make a push for the playoffs next year. But I see the Sabres being pretty quiet this trade deadline, and I'm okay with that. Flames, kind of same thing. I got Milan Lucic. I think they need to figure out if they're going to be a perennial Stanley Cup contender, a mediocre team, or a team that needs to do a bit of a retool. I think they're kind of in that limbo. They had a great season last year. This season has been very mediocre. What are we going to expect from them in the future? What's this team going to look like next year? But I think that starts with offloading Lucic's contract. I could see a team like Boston picking up Lucic. Just saying. Next up, Hurricanes. I mean, Hurricanes are tough too. I can see them trying to trade away Freddie Anderson or Antti Ranta, both on expiring contracts, with Kochetkov getting that extension into the following few seasons. One of these guys is not going to have a job as a Carolina Hurricane next year. I don't see them trading Kochetkov. Typically, we don't see a whole lot of goalie transactions at the trade deadline. That's more done in the offseason. But I could see the Canes trying to get some type of return before both of these guys hit unrestricted free agency. Something to keep in mind. Hawks, it's Jonathan Taves. He's going to go somewhere. It's just a matter of when and where. In parentheses, I have Patrick Kane because it's been a lot of flip flopping. There's been rumors where he's willing to waive his no trade clause, and then was it like a week ago? It was like Patrick Kane doesn't want to be traded. He wants to stay a Chicago Blackhawk. And then he's coming out and being like, I'm a little disappointed the Rangers went out and got Tarasenko. I kind of wanted to go to the Rangers. So who knows? So I guess just to clarify, my pick is the unparenthesized names or whatever. And the ones in parentheses I see is also options. I didn't do a full list for every team. Some teams had a lot and some teams really didn't have anyone. This is kind of the middle ground for that. Next up, we got the Avalanche. Eric Johnson on an expiring contract. I don't know if the Avs will part ways with him at the trade deadline if they want to make a push for the Stanley Cup like they did last year. He's, you kind of know what you're going to get with him, and he provides some leadership. So we'll see what happens, but the Avs don't have a whole lot of picks or assets to trade. Could also see a guy like maybe Newhook getting traded. He's still young. Maybe his breakout year hasn't come yet. They were hoping that he was going to break out a little bit this year in an elevator role. Hasn't happened. So you could see a guy like Newhook get moved. This is a very iffy team. We could see some random pieces get moved that we weren't expecting in lieu of their lack of draft picks. Okay, next up, Blue Jackets. Gavrikov on an expiring contract, on a pretty reasonable contract too for what he provides. The Jackets decide to part ways with Gavrikov. They're going to get a haul for him. There'll be a lot of teams calling, a lot of bidders for him. Other two guys, I have Nyquist potentially getting traded for some depth veteran forwards. He's been on the IR for quite some time. And Korpisalo on an expiring contract, playing well in net. I don't know the likelihood that we'll see Korpisalo get traded at this deadline, but it's still up in the air. Who knows? Right? Who knows? Stars was tough. Guryanov is the only player that really came to mind. Former first round draft pick, just hasn't really broken out into the star player he was supposed to. I don't even want to say star, even like a top 6, forward. Definitely found a home kind of on that third line. I could see, if anyone, the Stars parting ways with him. He has arbitration rights going into next year. He has his qualifying offer will bring his salary a little higher into next year. So I could see that being kind of a turnoff for the Stars. We'll see. They're kind of iffy on their picks too. They don't have a first-round pick for this year, for example. So next up, Red Wings. Tyler Bertuzzi, expiring contract. Pretty productive in the offensive zone. Going to command some type of pay increase next year. Could see him being traded out for a rental. And there's also Dylan Larkin. Larkin's asking for a lot of money. And whether he's worth his asking price or not it's very debatable. I don't have him valued at above $8 million, but some people do, and that's okay. But that depending on how contract extensions have been going between the GM of the Red Wings, was that Yzerman, and Larkin, we could very well see him traded, but I'm not as sold on that. Larkin's, first line player for the Wings. He's the captain. He provides a lot of leadership in that locker room. I think Bertuzzi's more likely of the two to get traded. Oilers was tough. Like, who do you trade? It's got to be Puljujarvi, and that's all I really had for the Oilers. I could see them doing a kind of a weak 1-for-1 swap, trading Puljujarvi out for maybe some underperforming player around the $3 million mark, money in, money out type thing. But I don't see the Oilers making too big of a splash. They need to shore up their defense quite a bit. There are a lot of concerns with their defense. So hopefully they're trading for some type of defensive defenseman that can help them make more of a playoff push in exchange for Puljujarvi, but we'll see. But I do think Puljujarvi gets dealt. I do think there are teams interested in Puljujarvi. Panthers, Duclair, probably reasonable contract. Went off last year. There's a lot tying him to Calgary, especially with guys like Huberdeau and Weegar up there. Been on the IR for quite some time. Could see his trade value decrease because of that. But I also have Rocco Gudis in there. We'll see if the Panthers are going to sell a little more and get some type of decent haul for Gudis as well. So we'll see if the Panthers decide that this is just a one-off and they don't really do a whole lot, or if they start selling some of these pieces, do kind of a minor retool. See what goes from there. Kings, Kings. Who do you trade from the Kings, right? I don't know. But I know they're willing to give up first-round picks. They gave up their first-round pick last year to Minnesota in exchange for Fiala. They gave up a prospect as well. We could see something similar like that happening this year. The only player that really stuck out was Brendan Lemieux, but I don't really know how much interest there is in Lemieux league-wide. I don't know if he's been put on waivers at all, but I have a feeling if he were put on waivers, he would be someone that would more likely than not clear those waivers. So I don't know if you're going to get much, if anything, for Lemieux. That's why I put first-round pick first. Minnesota Wild, it's got to be Matt Dumba, $6 million expiring contract, top 4 D-man with some offensive upside. It's got to be Matt Dumba. They're not going to be able to re-sign him this summer. They want to get something in exchange for Dumba. Other guys, I have Steele and Gaudreau. They kind of have two conflicting second line centers. Be good, cheap depth scoring for some other team out there. But the Wild need to start cutting some of these contracts that are going to be up for, they're not going to be able to re-sign this offseason. And Gaudreau and Steele are both likely to see some type of pay increase in the near future. So I could see them both being on the block as well. That wouldn't surprise me. I think they'll keep Gaudreau, but who knows? You have to make some tough decisions with that team with their Parise and Suter buyouts taking such a toll on their cap space. Habs was kind of tough too. The Canadians, I had Joel Edmondson. He still has term left on his contract. I had Hoffman and Dodonov. Dodonov, I don't know if he's on an expiring contract. I'm not going to look it up. But Hoffman, both those guys could be traded for depth scoring on some teams. Hoffman hasn't really panned out in Montreal, and that's okay. But Edmondson has some value. I think Dadonov would have some value. I don't know if you get a first-round pick in exchange for Dadonov. Probably not. I call him Dadonov. I think it's pronounced Dodonov, but my nickname for him is Dad, so there's that. Take that for what you will. That's a fun fact. It's a running joke with me and my friends. We call him Dad. Anyway, Predators was kind of tough too. There's, a lot of the higher end long contract, more expensive contracts. The kind of the players that can get you decent assets and returns are signed for multiple years and probably a little more like at a higher price than teams are willing to pay for. I got Tanner Jeannot expiring contract. Cody Glass is in there. I don't know if he has any type of value on the market, but if there is some type of value, if you can get a third-round pick for Cody Glass, I'd say if you're the Predators, you take it. You need to do something. The way this team has been performing isn't working out. It's mediocrity at best. You're a fringe 16th, middle. You're a very middle-of-the-road team. Whether you need to retool or I don't know what you need to do to be competitive, or maybe you need to do a full rebuild, that's not for me to decide. I think they could. I don't know. That's a tough team. They're in a really weird spot. But they don't have a whole lot of assets they can part ways with. So I got Tanner Jeannot up there. I think you get some type of return for Jeannot. Devils, it's between Tatar and I never know how to say his name, and I hear it 1,000 times. Severson. I say Severson. Could be Severson, but I say Severson. Pretty sure it's Severson. You can hate on me all you want for that because that's a name I should know. Please, that's okay to hate on me for that. It's a little embarrassing. But both these guys, veteran players, both on expiring contracts. I don't think Devils fans would be too upset to see Severson go elsewhere. Maybe a team is willing to give him a look for a depth defense. I'm not someone who's of the mindset that he really helps the defense. I feel like at times he's much more of a liability than he is benefiting a given team. But Tatar, one of those veteran players, he's upped his value a bit in New Jersey. The Devils could get some type of haul for him. It wouldn't surprise me if we saw either of these guys get traded. We'll see. The Devils should be an interesting team to watch. The Islanders, they already made their splash with Mr. Bo Horvat over there. They don't have a whole lot of more pieces to trade that are all really appealing. Semyon Varlamov, he's on an expiring contract. We could see him moved. I don't know if we see him moved. Probably not, but he was my best pick. He's a solid goaltender, and a lot of teams are looking for goaltending. We'll we'll see if he gets picked up. The thing is, the Islanders are going to need a backup goaltender to help them win a few more games to really make their playoff push. They're going for the playoffs with their acquisition of Horvat. We'll see. I wouldn't be too surprised if they didn't do a whole lot. Maybe a minor trade or two. Maybe trading some prospects leading up to the deadline. But I don't see a whole lot coming out of Long Island at this point. I got Scott Mayfield into expiring contract, decent defenseman. He could see some type of return. I don't know that he gets dealt either, but it wouldn't surprise me that the Islanders have a plethora of defensemen. But I can't picture Scott Mayfield in any other jersey than an Islanders jersey. So there's that too. Rangers also very tough because they just acquired Tarasenko. They have some highly touted young pieces. They could trade some of their prospects. But a lot of their players that would receive a decent haul at the trade deadline are on pretty long-term deals. And for some teams, that's a turnoff because that provides some more cap uncertainty in the future. Typically when we see guys get dealt with term, it's maybe another year, maybe two at most. But I don't know. I don't know what the Islanders. Kravtsov, I could see him getting dealt. I could see them granting his trade request, even though I'm sure that's been retracted now that he's a full-time NHL player. He really hasn't performed in the NHL. Was a pretty decent pick in that draft. I could see some teams taking some interest in him, but who knows? He had the whole tantrum with being in the minors, and that could be a turnoff for some teams. So we'll see if he gets traded. We'll see what happens. But my pick for the Rangers is if anyone's getting traded, it's going to be Vitaly Kravtsov. Senators, it was a little tougher as well. They have some pieces that could be traded. I think they need to trade some pieces to get assets back. They're not a playoff team this year, and that's okay, but they're working towards it. I got Tyler Mott up for trade. You also got guys on expiring contracts. These are all on expiring contracts for the Senators. You got Austin Watson, Hamonic, and Holden. Hamonic and Holden provide some defensive depth for some teams. Austin Watson can provide some bottom six forward potential for some team. And Mott, just doing Mott things. He's just could very well see himself out of Ottawa, but not because he's a bad player, just because he's on an expiring contract. And he's not a bad player. Anyway, Flyers was actually pretty tough. It's tough with the flat cap for the Flyers to make a splash at the deadline because they have a number of questionable contracts signed for a number of years. James Van Riemsdyk, JVR, is probably the most likely to go, but you'd have to retain at least 50. I guess you can only retain up to 50% salary. But $7 million contract, even at a cap hit of $3.5 million, is that going to be appealing to other teams? Are there other teams willing to take on that cap for a guy like JVR? What benefit is he going to provide? We've seen JVR play with, who was it? Man, Toronto maybe? We've seen JVR play outside of Philly before on another team, and it just did not work. He went back to Philly. His numbers went back up. He's like born to be a Philadelphia Flyer, man. Also been rumors about Ivan Provorov being traded. That would kind of surprise me. I really like Provorov. I think he's a solid defenseman. I think he's one of those key core guys the Flyers need to keep around to build around. But who knows what's going on with this organization? At this point, it just wouldn't surprise me if they traded a guy like Provorov. They probably shouldn't, though. I wouldn't, but I'm not the general manager of the Flyers, so. Penguins was kind of tough. We know they're going to go for it. We know they're not going to sell any of their major assets. They need some of their depth guys. I could see them giving up a first-round pick to make a run. Bluger we could also see go, too, as a depth guy. I don't know what kind of return he'll get, but he's on an expiring contract. He may be a decent rental player for someone. We might see Bluger a first round and like a prospect go in exchange for someone at from Pittsburgh this season, this trade deadline. But we'll see. Next up, Sharks. I'm wearing the Sharks jersey. Timo Meier. That's a big name. The concern with Timo Meyer is not just the asking price because it's high. He's also an excellent. He's a top line player. Right, so he's an established top line player. He's like pretty young in his prime. The asking price is going to be high for that type of player. Excuse me, but he's a restricted free agent. He's gonna have he has arbitration rights. You have to negotiate that extension, and the qualifying offer could push that to a $10 million contract next season. He's looking between $8 and $9 million in terms of his annual average value for what he'll get. A team has to be certain that with what they're giving up for Timo Meyer, that they can sign him. I don't know why my mom's texting me. Don't mind that. That was weird. They have to make sure they can sustain his payroll, his contract on future years. So you're not going to see a team like the Minnesota Wild picking up Timo Meyer because they can't afford it. They're dumping a lot of teams are dumping salary. So it's making this a little more complicated with the assets that the Sharks want and the extension, the impending pay raise that Timo Meyer will get. It's going to be tough for a lot of teams to accommodate. We'll see what happens. Other guys I have that, I could really see Nick Bonino getting traded. Depth centerman. He's done very well, and he did well in Minnesota. He's doing well in San Jose. I could totally see him going. He's on expiring contract as well. I could see that being one of those. He's going to get traded to whatever contending team, maybe play a third or fourth line center role, and I could see that team extending him a few more years beyond this season. So there's that. Erik Karlsson, also a lot of trade rumors. I got my Erik Karlsson jersey because he was washed up or something. The NHL put all his jerseys on sale, like super discounted. I got this for like $20 on the NHL websites, Fanatics. And yet he's having a Norris season. The thing with Erik Karlsson is his cap hit and the term left on his contract. I think that's very unappealing for a lot of teams to pick up. I don't know that we see Erik Karlsson get moved, but nonetheless, his name's up there because there have been so many rumors about him being traded. I don't think we see him traded. I'm going to be very transparent. I'd be surprised. But a trade for Erik Karlsson would be very fun to analyze. There would be a lot going on with that trade. Next up, Kraken. I don't see the Seattle Kraken doing a whole lot. I think they're excited. They're in the playoffs at the moment. We'll see. I think they're a wild card 1 position. They're three points above the wild card 2 position, 3 points above the first team on the fringe of making the wild card. So they're kind of a fringe team. They're trending more towards a fringe team. They're also 3 points away from being a division leader. Pacific is a weird place right now, but I really don't see them doing a whole lot. They got Martin Jones. He could be on the block. He's on an expiring contract. I don't know that we see Jones get traded. They also have a plethora of picks. If they want to make a splash, they got the cap space, they got the picks, they got some young guys. They could make a splash. That might be a surprise team in on someone like Timo Meyer. We'll see, but I think the Kraken are going to take a more conservative approach. I don't think they're going to make that big of a splash. If anything, I think they're going to keep growing year in and year out and kind of build up to that perennial Stanley Cup contending team. That's the approach I see from the Kraken, but trade deadline will be a little telling of that, whether I'm right or wrong. Blues, got to be Ryan O'Reilly, having a really brutal year. He's like a -28 this year. Selke finalist. I think he won the Selke one year. Expiring contract. I also got guys up there like Barbashev and Noel Achari. It depends. The Blues are really, really falling out of the playoff race quite substantially. We could see them sell off some of these expiring contracts and pieces for assets and future assets. Maybe they do some buying over the offseason and get themselves right back in that playoff talk next year. But I think at this point the Blues are gonna be and need to be sellers at this trade deadline. So they could be active from the selling standpoint, which would be interesting to watch. Next up, Tampa Bay Lightning. Ian Cole, I think, is the most obvious guy to be on the block. Kind of a controversial player. I don't know that they trade Ian Cole. That's the thing. I don't know if Tampa Bay makes a splash or is quiet. They really don't have a lot of assets to trade. They don't have a lot of picks. They kind of just have to keep doing what they're doing. Maybe they trade Ian Cole, but I don't know. They also have an expiring contract in Killorn, but we saw them try to trade Killorn last year, and it didn't really work out. So what happens with that? Killorn, are you going to get the value and production in a player in exchange for Killorn that Killorn provides? Probably not. For the Bolts, it's, do you trade these players and take less production in exchange, or do you go for another cup run and worry about that in the offseason? I don't see the Bolts doing a whole lot, honestly. Leafs, it's got to be Kerfoot, kind of that weird middling player. God, I think he's played on every line for the Leafs between this year and last year, and not just as like just because like they're trying to figure out their offensive structure and what their line should be. And Kerfoot, he's been good in some. He's been good on that second line. He's been good on that third line. He provides some offensive depth, but I think he's one of those guys that is probably first on the block if Toronto decides to trade a player. I could also see him giving up a first-round pick. I know they were very insistent in not giving up a first-round pick last year. It's down to crunch time for Dubas. They got to do a lot. They have a lot of stuff they got to take care of this offseason. They got to rebuild most of their team around their core guys are mostly the guys that are signed through next year. Most of their team is unrestricted or restricted free agents. I could see Dubas trying to make a bit of a splash and just trying to go for it and at the very least get past that first round this year. So we'll see. It really wouldn't surprise me if the Leafs made a splash at the deadline and traded that first round pick and traded Kerfoot. Maybe they trade both, and I don't know. Maybe a prospect or something. Still wouldn't surprise me. Canucks, it's got to be Shen. The Canucks can get, they're probably not going to get a first round pick for Shen, but maybe a second round pick. Shen's got some values on a very cheap contract. He's performed well in Vancouver, so the value is there. It's the question mark of if he'll perform well elsewhere, because we've seen him play on other teams and it hasn't really worked out. There's been rumors about Tyler Myers getting traded too. $6 million signed through next year, $6 million per season, annual average value. For a cap hit, it's a lot. You have to retain some salary if you're Vancouver. How much salary do you retain? It's kind of sketchy. I don't really see Tyler Myers getting moved per se, but he's been in the trade rumor talks. There's been guys coming out on like NHL Network and Sportsnet and stuff saying there is interest in Tyler Myers, so we could see him get moved. I have my doubts, but I could be wrong. That's kind of the fun of this. Knights really don't have a whole lot going on in terms of pieces they can trade. Could probably see him trading a first-round pick. They also have Nolan. I don't think Nolan has any value. I don't think he really gets traded, but expiring contract, former top, one of the top picks of that draft. He's someone that could could catch an eye from another team, but his injury history has been so brutal, and when he's played, he's looked good, but he still has a long way to go in terms of his development because he's missed so much time. He hasn't had that opportunity to develop, which is really unfortunate. It really at the end of the day, it just sucks for him. It's a player with a lot of promise. It's just, man, yeah. But we could see him get traded. We could see one more team take a risk on him. But I think Vegas was the last team in my brain. The last team I saw really kind of taking a chance on Nolan, and still really hasn't worked out, unfortunately. But I could see them trading a first-round pick for somebody. They're going to have to trade out cap space. I don't know who they trade out to make cap space, but I don't know. I think the Knights are a little more quiet at this trade deadline. I think they need... Maybe they're starting to humble up a bit, be a little more humble, but we'll see. Capitals, it's got to be Marcus Johansson. They don't have a whole lot of pieces to trade, unfortunately. But the Capitals always find a way to surprise me. Some of these guys you didn't think were ever going to get traded may end up getting traded. Thing is, they're making a playoff push. You got Ovechkin, you got Backstrom. Tom Wilson needs to come back for that team to really make a strong push in the playoffs. But see a guy like Johansson get traded maybe for I don't know. You kind of need a little bit of offense, you need a little bit of defense. So we'll see. Abe Kubel and maybe a second round pick I could see get traded by the Caps too. Um, we'll see. I don't think the Caps make too big of a splash this trade deadline. I think they're more of an off-season type team, but they've surprised me in the past. It's one of those weird teams I never really know what to make of or expect. Is the Capitals, which is ironic because I don't live too far away from the stadium. And the Jets, first round pick. I couldn't tell you who they're going to part ways with. Just going up and down their roster over and over again. It doesn't look like anyone is overly appealing or anyone will bring too big of a haul unless they have a lot of term or they're on a very good contract. But the Jets need to make some type of playoff push this year. A lot of their players are in their peak. The only player, excuse me, the only player potentially might be Dubois. We could see him, but he's made it clear he wants to go to Montreal. Is Montreal looking to acquire a player an RFA who's an RFA this summer? Are they willing to give up assets to acquire an RFA? And if so, what's that contract going to look like? Because Montreal's not in a very good place in terms of cap space. They're very up against the cap. They're looking to dump off cap space, not acquire more. So for that, I don't see Dubois really getting traded. I also think he's kind of fit in well this season in Winnipeg. I think he's, it's not going to surprise. It shouldn't be a surprise when they at least sign an extension that brings him to unrestricted free agency. But I don't think he's all that miserable up there. He seems to be playing well with his team. His team seems to be supporting him. So I don't think it's really a bad situation. I don't think there's any urgency with that. I think the Jets find a way to make the extension with Dubois work this offseason. I really don't see him getting traded. There's always that potential. This former player that wanted to get out, but if anyone, I could see him trading a first round pick, maybe some prospect. Probably not Cole Perfetti. I would hate to see him move from Winnipeg. But maybe some other unsigned prospect that I don't even know. Maybe probably for some offensive depth. They're very good defensively. They have good goaltending. Probably some offensive depth. That's probably what I'd go for. We'll see. Let me know what you guys think. Do you have anyone to add? Do you hate any of these picks that I have? Let me know your thoughts. I appreciate it. It's 32 minutes, so appreciate your time. I'm going to go see what my mom texted me about. All right, guys. Take care. All right. Thanks for watching. I appreciate you.